What if a virus could dissolve your organs from the inside out while you were still alive? That is not science fiction. That is Ebola. When the Ebola virus enters your bloodstream, it launches a biological war unlike anything your immune system has ever seen. It does not simply attack one organ, it attacks everything simultaneously. The virus hijacks your own immune cells, the very soldiers designed to protect you, and uses them as vehicles to spread deeper into your body. It infects the walls of your blood vessels, causing them to leak, weaken, and ultimately collapse. Your liver begins to fail, your kidneys shut down, proteins essential for blood clotting are destroyed, which means your blood loses its ability to stop bleeding internally and externally. This is why Ebola is classified as a hemorrhagic fever. In the most severe cases, patients bleed from their eyes, gums, and skin. The destruction happens within days. Your body, which took decades to build, begins dismantling itself in under 2 weeks. Understanding this internal war is the first step to understanding why Ebola is one of the most feared viruses in medical history. What if the most dangerous virus on Earth started with symptoms you would dismiss as a common flu? That is exactly how Ebola deceives its victims, and it is what makes it so terrifyingly effective. In the first 2 to 3 days, a person infected with Ebola feels fatigue, mild fever, and general body weakness. Most people assume it is nothing serious. They stay home, they rest, they do not seek help. But inside their body, the virus is multiplying at an explosive rate. By day 4 or 5, the symptoms turn vicious. Sudden high fever, intense muscle pain, severe headache, and a sore throat that makes swallowing nearly impossible. Then comes the vomiting, the diarrhea, and the rash. The body begins losing fluids at a catastrophic rate. Dehydration sets in rapidly. By the second week, internal bleeding begins. The eyes redden, the gums bleed. Patients experience what doctors call a cytokine storm, where the immune system overreacts so violently that it begins destroying healthy tissue. The tragedy is that by the time symptoms are unmistakably Ebola, the virus has already done enormous damage. Recognizing these early signs can literally mean the difference between life and death. What if the deadliest virus in Africa was actually less contagious than the common cold, yet still managed to wipe out entire villages? This is the paradox of Ebola that most people never understand. Unlike influenza or COVID-19, Ebola does not spread through the air. It is not airborne. You cannot catch it by simply breathing the same air as an infected person. Ebola spreads through direct contact with the bodily fluids of someone who is already showing symptoms: blood, saliva, sweat, vomit, urine, feces, and breast milk. This means that casual contact, a handshake, sitting next to someone on a bus, does not typically transmit the virus. So why did it spread so devastatingly in West Africa in 2014? Because of cultural practices. Funeral rituals in many West African communities involve washing and touching the body of the deceased. At the moment of death, a person infected with Ebola carries the highest viral load in their body, making their corpse extraordinarily infectious. Healthcare workers without proper protective equipment were also heavily affected. The spread of Ebola is not about airborne transmission, it is about behavior, culture, and the tragic gaps in protective infrastructure. What if a single infected patient crossing a border could trigger a national emergency that killed thousands within months? That is not hypothetical. That is exactly what happened in 2014. The West African Ebola outbreak is the largest in recorded history, infecting over 28,000 people and killing more than 11,000 across Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. It began with a 2-year-old child in a small village in Guinea in December 2013, a child who likely came into contact with an infected fruit bat. Within months, the virus had crossed international borders and reached the capital cities. For the first time in Ebola's history, cases appeared in urban centers where population density made containment nightmarish. The 2014 outbreak exposed the catastrophic fragility of healthcare systems in developing nations. Hospitals lacked basic protective gear. Nurses worked without gloves. Doctors were dying alongside their patients. The international response was slow, criticized globally for being too little, too late. But history did not begin there. The first recorded Ebola outbreak was in 1976, simultaneously in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan, with fatality rates reaching up to 90%. Understanding these outbreaks is not just history, it is a warning about our global preparedness today. What if surviving Ebola had less to do with the virus itself and more to do with the care you received in the first 72 hours? This is one of the most powerful and hopeful discoveries in modern Ebola research. The Ebola virus does not kill everyone it infects. Survival rates vary enormously, from as low as 10% in some outbreaks to as high as 70% with proper medical intervention. The difference? Supportive care. When patients receive intravenous fluids to manage dehydration, electrolyte replacement, and treatment for secondary infections, their chances of survival increase dramatically. The body, given the right support, can sometimes fight back. Researchers have also identified that certain genetic factors influence survival. People with specific immune response genes seem to mount a more effective defense against the virus. Additionally, the viral strain matters. Some strains of Ebola, like the Reston strain, do not appear to cause severe disease in humans at all. The 2014 outbreak also led to breakthrough research. The experimental drug ZMapp showed promise. Remdesivir, later famous for COVID-19, was initially developed as an Ebola treatment, and in 2019 the FDA approved the first Ebola treatment Inmazebi, a monoclonal antibody cocktail that significantly improves survival when given early. What if science could turn the tide against one of history's most feared viruses? And already has. In 2019, the world witnessed something extraordinary. The FDA approved the first Ebola vaccine, RVSV-ZEBOV, marketed as Ervebo, and it was not just effective, it was described by researchers as a near miracle. Clinical trials in Guinea showed the vaccine to be approximately 100% effective in preventing Ebola infection when administered using a ring vaccination strategy, vaccinating all contacts of a confirmed case and their contacts in turn, creating a protective ring around the outbreak. This was the same strategy used to eradicate smallpox, but the path to this vaccine was long and painful. Scientists had been working on Ebola vaccines since the 1980s, but without major outbreaks, pharmaceutical companies saw no financial incentive to fund large-scale trials. It took the devastation of 2014 with global panic, international headlines, and the threat of Ebola reaching Western nations to unlock the funding that accelerated vaccine development. This raises a deeply uncomfortable question. Does the world only invest in saving lives when wealthy nations feel threatened? The Ebola vaccine story is a triumph of science, and simultaneously a sobering indictment of global health priorities. What if I told you that somewhere on this planet right now, there exists a virus so catastrophic that it can reduce a healthy, living human being into a state of biological collapse within 10 days? What if I told you that this virus has killed entire communities, brought down healthcare systems, and terrified the most elite medical minds in the world? What if I told you that it begins so quietly, so deceptively, that the person carrying it inside their body has absolutely no idea, and neither does anyone around them? And here's the most chilling part. What if I told you that the reason you have not heard enough about it is because of where it tends to strike, and that the silence around it reveals something deeply uncomfortable about how the world decides whose lives are worth saving? The virus I am talking about is Ebola. And today I am going to take you deep inside the science of this outbreak, inside the human body under attack, inside the history of destruction, inside the desperate race for survival, and inside the remarkable story of how science fought back. Buckle in, because what you are about to hear will change the way you see viruses, medicine, and humanity itself forever. Let us begin where every Ebola story begins, inside the human body. When the Ebola virus enters your system, it does something uniquely diabolical. It does not rush to destroy you immediately. It infiltrates your immune cells first, the macrophages and dendritic cells, the very first responders your body sends to fight infection. It hijacks them, replicates inside them, and uses them as a Trojan horse to carry the virus deeper into your bloodstream. Within days, the virus spreads to your liver, your kidneys, your adrenal glands, and the walls of your blood vessels. This is where the catastrophe begins. The blood vessel walls weaken and start to leak. Your blood's ability to clot is destroyed as the virus dismantles the proteins responsible for clotting. Your organs begin to fail one by one. In severe cases, bleeding occurs internally and externally from the eyes, the gums, beneath the skin. This is why scientists call it a viral hemorrhagic fever. The body that took a lifetime to build begins unraveling within days. This biological destruction is not random. It is precise, systematic, and devastatingly efficient. Understanding what Ebola does inside the human body is the foundation of understanding why survival requires intervention in the earliest possible hours. The symptoms of Ebola begin with a deception. In the first 2 to 3 days, an infected person feels nothing more alarming than fatigue, a mild fever, and general weakness. They might take a painkiller and rest. They assume it is the flu. They have no idea that inside their body, millions of viral particles are multiplying with terrifying speed. By day 4 or 5, the mask comes off. High fever strikes. Muscle pain becomes so severe that movement is agonizing. The headache is crushing. Swallowing becomes nearly impossible. Then the gastrointestinal symptoms arrive. Violent vomiting and diarrhea that strip the body of fluids at a rate that rapidly leads to dangerous dehydration. A rash may appear. The eyes begin to redden. And then, in the second week, something the medical community calls a cytokine storm occurs. The immune system, overwhelmed and confused, begins attacking healthy tissue. It is the body fighting so hard to survive that it begins destroying itself. This is the moment that separates those who live from those who do not. And this is why every single day, every single hour of delayed treatment is measured not in discomfort, but in lives. Now let us address one of the most dangerous myths about Ebola, that it spreads like other deadly viruses, invisibly through the air, unstoppable. It does not. Ebola is actually less contagious than influenza. It does not travel through the air. You cannot catch it by breathing near an infected person. Ebola requires direct contact with the bodily fluids of someone who is already sick: blood, vomit, sweat, saliva, urine, or feces. So why did it devastate entire regions of West Africa? Because of factors that had nothing to do with the virus's biology and everything to do with the human context around it. Funeral traditions in many communities involve washing and touching the body of the deceased with bare hands. And at the moment of death, a person infected with Ebola carries the highest concentration of viral particles in their body. Their corpse is extraordinarily dangerous. Healthcare workers without proper protective equipment were infected in hospitals. In communities without running water, without reliable medical infrastructure, without public health education, the virus moved rapidly. Ebola's spread is not a failure of science. It is a reflection of inequality, of poverty, of what happens when vulnerable communities are left without the tools they need to protect themselves. The history of Ebola outbreaks is a history written in tragedy. The very first outbreak was detected in 1976, simultaneously in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Sudan. In some affected villages, the fatality rate reached 90%. 90%. Nearly every person infected died. For decades that followed, Ebola struck in sporadic, relatively contained outbreaks in remote areas of Central Africa. And then came 2014, the outbreak that shocked the world. A 2-year-old child in a small village in Guinea, patient zero, most likely came into contact with an infected bat. From that single point of exposure, a chain of transmission ignited that, within months, had crossed international borders, reached capital cities, and infected more than 28,000 people. Over 11,000 died. For the first time, Ebola cases appeared in urban centers, in densely populated cities where contact tracing was nearly impossible. Healthcare systems buckled under the pressure. Hospitals ran out of beds, out of gloves, out of masks. Doctors and nurses died trying to help patients. The world watched, and the world was slow to respond. The 2014 outbreak did not just reveal the power of a virus, it revealed the dangerous fragility of global health infrastructure when it is most needed. But then science fought back, and what it delivered was nothing short of remarkable. In the race to find treatments, researchers discovered that the most powerful weapon against Ebola was not a single drug. It was comprehensive supportive care. Patients who received intravenous fluids, electrolyte balance management, and treatment of secondary bacterial infections survived at dramatically higher rates than those who received no medical intervention. This finding alone reshaped how outbreak response teams approached Ebola treatment centers. Then came the therapeutics. Remdesivir, a drug the world would later know as a COVID-19 treatment, was initially developed as an Ebola antiviral. Monoclonal antibody therapies showed extraordinary promise in clinical trials. In 2019, the FDA approved Inmazeb, a triple monoclonal antibody cocktail specifically targeting Ebola, with survival rates in clinical trials that stunned researchers. And then the vaccine RVSV-ZEBOV, known commercially as Ervebo. Clinical trials in Guinea showed nearly 100% efficacy. Using the same ring vaccination strategy that eradicated smallpox, health teams vaccinated all known contacts of confirmed cases, creating a protective barrier around each outbreak. Science had done what once seemed impossible. It had found answers. It had turned the tide. But here is where I want to leave you with the most important thought of all. The vaccine existed. The treatments existed. The knowledge existed. And yet thousands still died. Not because science failed, but because the pipeline between scientific discovery and the people who needed it most was broken. Funding for Ebola research stalled for decades because the disease primarily affected communities in low-income nations. It took the fear of Ebola reaching Western airports, Western hospitals, Western cities to unlock the funding that accelerated the very breakthroughs that saved lives. The science of Ebola teaches us about viruses, but the story of Ebola teaches us something far more important. It teaches us about human priorities. It teaches us that the fastest way to stop the next outbreak before it becomes the next pandemic is to stop treating global health as a charity and start treating it as what it truly is, our collective security. The invisible boundary that separates an outbreak in a remote village from a global emergency is thinner than most people are comfortable admitting. Ebola is not just a chapter in a medical textbook. It is a mirror, and what it reflects back at us about science, about equity, about the extraordinary resilience of the human immune system, and about the extraordinary fragility of human systems should inspire us, disturb us, and above all, move us to do better. Because the next outbreak is not a question of if, it is a question of when. And the only variable that matters is whether humanity will be ready. Ebola is a virus of extraordinary complexity and terrifying power, but it is not invincible. From understanding what it does inside the human body, to recognizing the early symptoms that are so easily dismissed, to tracing the paths of its spread, to learning the lessons of history's deadliest outbreaks, and finally to witnessing the triumph of human ingenuity in the form of vaccines and treatments that actually work. The story of Ebola is ultimately a story about knowledge. Knowledge saves lives. Every fact you learn today is a fact that could one day protect you, protect someone you love, or shape the way you think about global health and human responsibility. The battle against Ebola was won in laboratories, in treatment centers, and in communities that refused to give up. But it was also won in classrooms, in conversations, and in the simple act of choosing to understand. Stay informed, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of a single piece of knowledge to change the course of an entire life. Thank you so much for being here today. Your time, your attention, and your willingness to engage with a topic this important means everything. Learning about something this serious takes courage, and you showed up. That matters. Go forward with this knowledge. Share it with others, and remember, in a world where invisible threats exist, awareness is your most powerful medicine. Good luck to every single one of you, in your health, in your learning, and in everything you do. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and never stop asking questions. The world needs more people like you.